Absolutely, I think they are. And I think that's also rippled through into businesses as well. So businesses are now very aware of how they're using people's data, how they're collecting it, particularly with the Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal. And then, for example, with the massive potential fines for BA and Marriott of 183 million, 99 million, this has really got boards thinking about it as well. So they know they've got to react well when individual data subjects exercise their rights and ask for copies of their data, or what data do you hold about me? And so people are really, there's a lot of activists out there already pushing that agenda as well. Absolutely. Well, GDPR's kicked off an enormous industry actually, including our own company. So GDPR was really the spur for us. So what happened before GDPR? Very much the same sort of rules. GDPR extended them quite considerably and strengthened them, but the rules were all there in terms of data subject rights and other things like this. What happened with GDPR was the maximum fine went from £500,000 to 20 million euros, or 4% of global turnover, whichever is greater. So that really focused the minds as well. And also with all of that, that GDPR really made the news, so it made it much better in the minds of individuals to exercise their own rights. So all of that together created a perfect storm, making people more aware. GDPR has really spurred global privacy laws actually. So in California, they brought in the California Consumer Protection Act, and there's actually a new one coming through as well on the agenda. It's not law yet, but it's being proposed. And the CCPA in California is very much based on GDPR with a couple of local tweaks. It went through very quickly, so it's quite an interestingly drafted law. Brazil's law is very much influenced by GDPR. India's law is very much influenced by GDPR. So Australia and Singapore, you mentioned, they already had really good data protection laws in place, and they are looking at updating those. There's also, for example, Australia just brought in a breach obligation as well, which we have here in the GDPR. So yes, it's definitely spurred global requirements, and actually it's pushed data protection to the number one concern for compliance people in the Asia Pacific as well. Absolutely. So actually you've hit the nail on the head for GDPR. So US companies on average have spent more on GDPR than European companies, it's bizarre, but they're more used to spending on technology and compliance as well. And GDPR changed the territorial scope of the law. So you can be subject to GDPR if you target individuals in Europe. So, and those individuals don't need to be European, they can be any nationality. So if you're outside Europe processing data about Europe or about individuals in Europe, you're probably going to be covered by GDPR. And interestingly, that territorial scope has been adopted by California as well for the CCPA. So that's why the whole of the US is very concerned about the California law. Yeah. That's a great question, because if you don't have cultural change, you're not going to be able to implement what's called privacy by design and privacy by default. So privacy by default is that your culture and your systems are all set up that privacy is baked in. And then privacy by design is really that you've trained people on all your policies and procedures. You've got the cultural aspect that when you create a new process, you're thinking about privacy by design in that process when you're going through. And the way to do that is really cultural change, because it is very much different now than under pre-GDPR life. And so the way that we help people do that, we have an innovative cloud solution. We've actually won GDPR Company of the Year 2019, and in the last 14 months, 5 nominations for innovation, 2 for security for our breach module. And that innovation is in taking something incredibly complex and making it really simple. So banks often have a large compliance team, but they're also overstretched. They're also stressed out, they're overburdened and under-resourced typically. And so they don't want anything extra complex on top. And GDPR is this big monster. So what we do is we make that really achievable, very visual, easy reporting, very straightforward for people in different companies, different teams, and different jurisdictions to all work together on the same thing, so you don't have a different way of doing things. And that makes it, we've got case studies with fintechs such as Ravelin, with investors such as MML Capital, and we have listed wealth managers, etc. as clients. And all the case studies and testimonials about how much more efficient we make the process, both working with your own teams and across jurisdictions, and with external advisors as well. And also less stress, and you're spending less time, saving cost, and that opportunity cost. If you're GDPR compliant, your risk of having an expensive data breach is greatly reduced as well. So there's that intangible of a reduced opportunity, the opportunity cost of a breach is also reduced. So there's an interesting European Parliament report just out actually, about how blockchain is pretty incompatible with GDPR because of the idea of this immutable record. And GDPR, obviously, you've got to be able to erase and this sort of thing. So there's different ways to look at it and different ways to try and address that. But the report comes out with a very interesting point that looking at how blockchain and GDPR can coexist, which is quite hard, so that actually what it throws up is GDPR itself is still quite ambiguous in certain areas. So people need to be able to have a risk-managed approach to it, which is obviously where we come in as well. So really what GDPR is about is it's a bit like ISOs, like 27001 for security, 9001 for quality, etc. You have a set of rules, and how you implement them is appropriate to the risk. And so really that's how GDPR can be applied. So when you're looking at anything like AI itself raises some very interesting questions. Data sharing, big data analysis, repurposing data, it's big questions. But these aren't faults of the law. These are just the fact that the technology capabilities have exploded, and the law actually is technology neutral. So it's applying those first principles to the new situations, and that enthusiasm of using new tech because we can, while also looking at how do we have to do this.